Good day to you. So where are you living this summer? Are you living in a community? You know, amongst a group of people who share some of the same values and traits and rituals as you? That you have something in common? You kind of feel like you're living together even though they're in their apartment and you're in your apartment? For example, if there's an issue with the road and the road is being torn up and to get to your place you have to go around some construction, pull into a spot that's not normally your spot, but it's a place that you're going to park. And so everybody's a little bit more considerate during that time period because you know that everybody's having to scramble to find a spot. It's a small example of the way that a group of people can act together when they believe that they're part of a community, sort of looking out for each other. And that same idea, the idea of a community, is behind what today's chapter is all about, because today's chapter is all about the virtual community, the community that exists online, the community that you belong to or communities that you belong to through your social media use. It starts off this chapter with talking about traits of a community, and it picks up this idea from the famous sociologist Emily Durkheim. She talks about traits as being habits that people have. The book doesn't make that explicit, but that's what traits really are. They're habits. They're things about our personalities. If we look, for example, at Americans, when we see each other, we like to say, "How are you doing?" It's a trait. It's something that's embedded in our culture. Very different from Mexicans, for example, who say, "Good day to you." Not "How are you doing?" personally. They're saying, "Good day to you. I wish you a good day." They say "Buenos dias" or "Buenas tardes" for good afternoon. It's a very different kind of trait, even though it has some similarities to "How are you doing?" It's an example of the way that communities express themselves according to common traits, and it's what makes up a community when you have those traits that exist among a bunch of people who are getting together. The next term that is talked about in the book having to do with the virtual community is de-individuation. Thank you. De-individuation. That's where a mass of people are acting as one. A mass of people are acting as one. As in when somebody makes a post on Facebook, it could be about something that's happening politically wise. I'm using that as an example a lot in my class because we're in political campaign season, but the Democratic convention was on again last night, and I was watching the tweets that were going out from Donald Trump and others, and I was watching Facebook posts, and I would see a post that would go up that just said, "So-and-so nailed it." Speaking about one of the speakers last night. So-and-so nailed it. And then if you look at the comments below, a lot of people just like, or thumbs up. These are people who are participating in de-individuation. It's a mass of people expressing one sentiment, that this person nailed the speech. And you see this all the time on social media. As do you see this next trait called diffusion of responsibility. This is a sort of a negative. And I saw it actually in your team, your social media team project, viral project proposals. I saw a lot of falling apart of communication among members, and it's very easy to do. There's a diffusion of responsibility when you put people into a team. One person can kind of hang in the back, not answer any emails, not contribute much to the project, let somebody else take the lead, let somebody else turn in the assignment, let somebody else proofread the assignment, let somebody else make sure the assignment is in on time, let somebody else figure out what is due for the assignment, because diffusion of responsibility is so easy. It's like hiding in anonymity. When there's 3 people, 4 people, how can you really say, okay, this one person is responsible for the group's project being of a poor quality? It's much harder to do that because there's always 2 sides to the story, 3 sides to the story, etc. So diffusion of responsibility is also something that takes place online in groups of people who are getting together. They're joining discussion groups, or they're just focusing all of their comments around one person's comments to that itself form a group. And there's one person in there somewhere who's acting as what the book later calls a troll, trying to disrupt the communication. And you can't really say that it's their fault or that they're the one who's the most unhealthy in the group, because they're chiming in as everybody else is. It's a diffusion of responsibility. Now comes some traits that go together in the book, and one of them is consciousness of kindness. And that has to do with that in a community there is a general feeling of people trying to express benevolence towards each other, which is another word for kindness. If you make something extra food-wise, if you have a close neighbor next door to you and you consider yourself part of the community, you might take some extra. Maybe it's a loaf of bread, maybe it's an extra pie, maybe it's something else that you have. It's community of kindness. If you see some trash on somebody's driveway as you're walking up your driveway, you just walk over and pick it up now. People don't do that too much, but it's an example of consciousness of kindness. Then we have shared rituals, which I alluded to earlier. Shared rituals are things that we do on a consistent basis because of the culture that we belong to. So, for example, if you go onto Facebook, you'll find that one of the shared rituals that's very, very common is for people to leave emojis after they make a statement. And I think that also speaks to the inadequacy of words to express feelings, that sometimes you have to include a picture of a face making making a face so that you express more closely what you would like to express. And the whole idea of people using emojis is what brings people into Facebook in many ways, is because that's part of a shared ritual that people share. Also, there's a sense of moral responsibility as the next trait when we're talking about traits of a community. That there is a feeling that people need to do the right thing. And so if there's somebody living in the neighborhood who's not keeping their lawn as they should, they're letting it grow and it's way overgrown and making the whole neighborhood look bad, that somebody is going to say something to that person because they're not sharing the same moral responsibility as other people. They're not making sure to keep up their house in favor of everybody's property value remaining high and just having a nice aesthetic to look at. So if that person continues with their lawn that way, they may get reported to the zoning officer, who may send out a letter because they're not sharing that same sense of moral responsibility. And the last trait is the trait of reciprocity. And this is the idea that in a community, if one person gives, then they should also be able to take. If another person takes, then they should also give back. A lot of communities in the U.S. have what are called community gardens, especially in cities where you have condos without their own plot of land. So they'll either purchase a plot of land, have one donated to them, lease one, whatever, and they'll have that plot of land across the road from the condo, and everybody participates in it. And there is a moral obligation that people feel, even though there's no police around, no surveillance cameras, etc. If somebody goes and picks an ear of corn, for example, then their idea is they have to give back. So they are feeling that they need to be growing something themselves, maybe green beans, so that other people can come take the green beans. It's the whole idea that there's reciprocity. We see the same thing on social media. We see it at an individual level when you comment on somebody else's posts or like somebody else's posts or reply to somebody else's posts. You expect them to do the same when you post photos. We see it on that way. But we also see it in terms of communities of groups. If you belong to a group, for example, I belong to a group. It's a Rolling Stones fan group. The name of it is called the Shadoobies. And there's an idea that if you're going to post a photo onto that group, then everybody who is a member of that group should comment on what they remember about that photo. This was 1972 in Texas when the Stones were playing live, for example, when you see a photo that has them from that era. There's a reciprocity. One person posts, and they're expecting you also to comment. Now let's move on to the second big heading in the chapter. It has to do with theoretical approaches to the community in terms of how you study a community. And one way of studying a community is through the media. And when you study a community by virtue of the way that they connect through the media, you're talking about an imagined community. You're talking about an imagined community. Every single day I get up and I read the newspaper. I know that I'm not like you because most people in your age breakdown not only don't read newspapers, are hardly watching any TV, and really are getting most of all of your information, entertainment, persuasion, everything else through your phone. But for people in my generation, we still like to read a newspaper. And when I read that newspaper and I see obituaries of people who have passed away, I see people who have been arrested, I see local people who have received grants, I see people who have run in marathons and won those races. These people I've never met, but I've seen them in the paper before. There are people who recur in the paper. Letters to the editor come from people who are regularly. In fact, I just saw an obituary for a man named Charles Bardzillo. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. I knew his name for like 20 years, even though I never met him, because he was always writing letters to the newspaper, usually about the President of the United States, who he was criticizing. And I saw his name in the obituary, and I thought, I kind of knew him, but I didn't really. So it's an imagined community when media, including social media, bring people together. And think about the groups that you belong to and the people who are included in those groups who you've never really met, but you feel that you know them. Next up, in terms of studying a community through a theoretical approach, is the idea of a subculture. A subculture is a smaller group of people that fit within a larger community group. So we look at the Democratic Party right now holding its convention in Philadelphia. Last week, Republicans held theirs in Cleveland. The Democrats would like to think that they are a community in and of themselves. They're intending on voting in a way that takes back the Senate, is what their hope is, and also puts a Democratic president in the office, specifically Hillary Clinton. But within that community, there are the Bernie supporters, the Bernie Sanders supporters, the feel the burn people. These are people that are very different from the Democratic people and the Clinton people. These are people that want free college tuition. These are people that are more physical in the way that they express their opinions. They protest. There was some smaller protests than they thought were going to happen, but still protests nonetheless at the Democratic conference. So we have a subculture protesting against a larger culture that it actually belongs to. Subcultures exist all over social media platforms. Then you have something called an audience community. An audience community is a community that forms around a media product. For example, The Walking Dead is a hit TV show with college students. Many of my students watch The Walking Dead. Many of my college students go on social media before a Walking Dead episode comes on and says, no spoilers, no spoilers. So they're going on going on social media to make sure that nobody blows what's going to happen in the plot line that night, because they are so involved in this community of people who talk about what's going to happen with The Walking Dead. It all revolves around a media product. Same with Game of Thrones. People are absolutely fascinated with the writing in that show, and the endings, and the characters, and the boundaries that are pushed, particularly sexuality. People who are fans of that show become a part of an audience community just by virtue of watching that show and then talking about it on social media. Then our chapter goes into its final major section, which is status and roles. And we've been discussing this in various forms in other chapters, but basically it talks about how people who belong to virtual communities have different statuses within those communities. And the statuses that they have are largely defined by their social roles. Social roles are systematic patterns of behavior. When you join a group and you're sort of a new member, you feel a little bit of timidity, a little bit of nervousness. You're not necessarily going to speak everything that comes to your mind because you kind of feel like you're new. You have to go through a rite of passage. You're one of the members who doesn't really know the ropes, so to speak. And so you sort of have a low status versus somebody who's been in it for a while, maybe even somebody who's been elected president, somebody who's a moderator, somebody who's a chairperson. If they have a title, in other words, they have a higher status. Other roles that go on within social communities include lurkers. Lurkers are people who use social media, but they rarely comment. They're taking it in. They're seeing what other people are saying. They're looking at other people's photos. They're following other people's lives and careers. It's like they're looking in their kitchen window without those people knowing about it. They don't want to comment. They don't want to put themselves out there. They just want to be able to take in the information. They lurk in the background. And then there's newbies. Newbies I just talked about a moment ago. These are people who are new to a social media platform or new to a group. I still consider myself a newbie on Twitter. When I look at Twitter and I see hashtags and I see the @ sign or the ampersand sign, and I see a lot of acronyms, and I see lots of words that have capital letters, not through the whole word, but through the beginning of a word that's mashed up with another word, I'm kind of intimidated. I still feel like a newbie. I feel like I'm not yet accustomed enough to Twitter to put my own stuff out there. I'm not sure that I want to, but even if I did, I would feel nervous because I'm still a newbie with Twitter. I'm not quite sure how it works and how people communicate through it with it effectively. Another social role is information gatherers. These are people that pride themselves on getting a hold of information that the other members don't have and then sending that information to them. We see this all the time on social media. Mostly these people are providing links. Sometimes they're providing memes. Sometimes they're providing snapshots, screenshots of information that they've grabbed somewhere on the web. They're wanting to let other people know about something that the community didn't already know about. Then there are gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are important people that serve as distributors of information to masses of people. You can look at it outside of the online world. You can look at teachers as gatekeepers. You can look at parents as gatekeepers. You can look at bosses as gatekeepers. They are people that others look up to. And those others look up to these people to hear what their opinion is. So these people speak a lot of times, and others gather around because they want to hear what they have to say. We find that also on social media. We can say that Donald Trump is a gatekeeper. When he tweets, he has millions of followers. So if he tweets something about Ted Cruz, if he tweets something about Hillary Clinton, he's been tweeting a lot, calling Senator Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas, including last night. He is getting a lot of people to wonder about her Indian heritage and whether it's legit, which is what he's trying to do by calling her Pocahontas, question her claim that she has Native American in her background. Then there are trolls, as I mentioned earlier, people who try to disrupt the communication that's going on. They will come on, they will be a devil's advocate, they will argue against you, they will say that they disagree, they'll make fun of what you're doing. These are trolls. Then there are sock puppets. Not sure that I care for this terminology, but a sock puppet is somebody who is not who they appear to be. I was trying to find out how my book, Rounding Some Corners, was being reviewed, and I went on to various websites, YouTube, Amazon, where it's sold, and others, and there was the name of a jazz musician. I forget the name, but I knew it was a jazz musician. Even had a photograph of this old musician, this African-American musician, and that was this person's profile, but the comments were really, really nasty about my book. And I expect comments that are negative and critical. You actually want that. But these went beyond that. These were personal. This person was attacking me. He was saying, Rob, you don't know how to make a video. You live in a utopian professor world that's anti Western civilization, saying some things that were rather personal, and I thought, this doesn't sound right. And I finally found out it was somebody that I had an argument with many, many years ago, who I went to Millersville University with, a person who has deeply different political beliefs, a person who himself was once a teacher at the university level, but was not rehired. I don't know if that is playing into his feelings, but he was a sock puppet. He was using this black African-American jazz musician to hide behind to be able to make critical comments. And then the final concept for the chapter is group boundaries. When you have a virtual community, it's not like anybody can belong. You have to have the similar tastes and interests, and sometimes there are actually membership requirements. You have to submit your name to see if you can join a Facebook friend group, for example, or there's a moderator before your post will be posted to the general group. There are membership requirements that normally go along with virtual communities. So that will wrap up this chapter. Have a great day.